Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. CPBF is a charitable organization, and our mission is to support and educate families of premature babies. This Premi Chat series is one of the many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families, researchers, and parents and other healthcare professionals. Here every Friday, we talk with experts, researchers, and parents who share with us their experience and knowledge. Also on our website, CanadianPremies.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. And one of the programs is the COVID care program. We are offering free therapy for families who are currently in the NICU or up to a year post-discharge. For more information, you can visit our website, CanadianPremies.org. And today we're going to talk about vision development from infancy to childhood. This presentation will give you an overview of typical and atypical visual development from birth to school age, with emphasis on visual motor skill acquisition. Visual perceptual development will be discussed, as well as signs and symptoms of vision-related learning disorders for high-risk babies and children. Treatment options such as vision therapy, prisms, and lenses will also be discussed. And I have here joining me live from Toronto, Dr. Angela Peddle, who graduated with a Doctor of Optometry degree from the Pennsylvania College of Optometry. She completed a residency in Vision Therapy and Rehabilitation from SUNY State College of Optometry, where she was awarded the distinguished Dr. Martin Birnbaum Memorial Award for outstanding knowledge and skill in behavioral optometry. Dr. Peddle is the founding president of the Canadian Optometrists in Vision Therapy and Rehabilitation, a not-for-profit organization that promotes public and professional awareness and education in vision therapy. She currently has 2 private practice vision therapy clinics in the Toronto area, where she teaches residents and interns. With a keen interest in education, she has published articles and posters on vision rehabilitation, strabismus, amblyopia, and learning-related vision problems. She's also an international lecturer offering courses in several areas. Dr. Peddle, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Fabiana, for having me. This is going to be fun.
It is great. So I will let you share your screen. I know you have a presentation to share with us. And for all of you watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can ask your questions, send your questions on the comments below. Dr. Peddle will answer your questions at the end of her presentation.
Perfect. Here I go. Share screen.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Presentation, and here you go.
Great, thank you. So thank you for having me. It's a beautiful sunny day in Toronto, so I'm excited to talk about what fuels me, vision and vision development. I was asked, I have this lecture that I often give to school teachers, physiotherapists, OTs, just about regular development in children. And I've tweaked it today to talk about our premature population as well. But of course, our premature population grows up to be toddlers and children. So I've still included all of those important visual milestones and checklists to watch for to ensure that your child is on track. So here we go. Some objectives that Fabiana talked about earlier. We're going to go through the normal and abnormal visual development and milestones in infancy. I want to review some key visual skills that we need for learning, including, especially if there's parents out here, how to screen for any deficits that might be causing your child to fall behind in learning or even gross motor development. Of course, we're going to review treatment and management of these problems because, of course, we need solutions to these issues. And then we're just going to discuss perceptual development through vision rehabilitation, vision therapy, and other therapies that can help bolster a better visual system. But let's talk about why vision is so important. Well, if we're talking now, especially more important now more than ever with online learning, is that 90% of school activities are visual in nature. More information is processed through the eye than all of the rest of the body at any given moment. So it's our fastest mode of processing and our primary sense. I'm envisioning now, because my children are doing the same, as we're online in front of a flat screen all day trying to learn, where the most important information is coming from the nature of a classroom environment. So getting all the senses, getting to see and touch and feel and do everything all at once. So we're seeing some changes in visual system even just over the last 6 months of online learning here in Canada. Vision is the fastest method of visual processing. So the fastest way to get to the brain is through the eyes. And our brain has over 85% of the brain has visual connections. So every lobe of the brain and the brain stem has visual connections. This system is 5 times larger than the entire auditory system. So if we're talking about a brain injury, whether acquired or a concussion injury, likely vision is affected because 85% of the brain, potentially more if we include the brainstem, has visual connections. I'll give you some statistics here. Vision disorders are the 4th most common disability among children in North America, and most common vision problems are not associated with visual acuity, which is what we would most often think. We say, my child has 20/20 vision, what else is there to assess? Well, there are greater than 15 other important visual skills that we need for learning that are often neglected in a routine eye exam. 2 to 5% of our neurotypical preschool children have impaired vision. Children with developmental delays have a much higher incidence of vision problems, and we'll see some studies coming up in this text. So let's go through the stages of visual development. This is day 1, my son on day 1 here. You can see the eyes aren't perfectly aligned, but they're open. Let's talk about what is vision. So I hope this makes sense upon the next few slides, but vision isn't, if I teach a lot of students and residents, and I like to ask the question, which seems silly in optometry school for me to ask, what is vision? And I get all sorts of great answers. It's how the cornea is refracting light into the lens onto the retina. It's how the retinal photoreceptors receive light and bring it to the cortex. I get all these very good, interesting, and wrong answers. Vision, not sight. Vision is the ability to make meaningful interpretation of what is seen. As soon as something meaningful is interpreted through vision, that is when a learned skill has occurred. So I have this picture here, and usually I can see my audience to know if anyone's understanding this, but I'll walk you through it. If you know this, then you can identify what this picture is right away. But if you've never seen this picture before, you might say, I have no idea what she's trying to present to me today. This is a picture that if you have good vision in one eye, good sight in one eye even, hopefully two, but if you only have one, that's okay. It's clear, it's detailed, it's black and white, but it is an object that you could identify when you were probably 2 or 3 years old. In fact, if I told this word to a 2 or 3 year old, they could probably tell me a lot about this object or this item. If you can see it, I'll give it away because I can't tell in the audience if anyone can or cannot see it, that this is a picture, maybe you can see my cursor, this is a picture of a cow. A cow sort of turned head on onto his body. If you can see my pointer, I hope you can. I'm outlining the snout here, eye, an ear, and an ear. See this long snout? And this is his side. So he's sort of turning on. Hopefully a few of you said, that, of course I see it. That's a cow. And then you can say, of course I knew a cow was when I was 2 or 3 years old. As soon as you said, aha, there, I see it, that is when vision occurred. You had sight before. You said, I have clear vision sight. I can see that it's black and white, but to me, it looks like an aerial view of an island or, some sort of psychological Rosner test. But as soon as I outlined it and I said, this is the snout, this is the eyes, this is the ears, and you said, that is a cow. Now you can't unsee that. That is when vision occurred. You made a meaningful interpretation of something, linked it in with your knowledge of cow, and your file in your mind goes with cow, farm animal, milk, and now you can't unsee that. So if I take that away, so back to what is vision, and I put it up again, you've learned a new skill, you've linked that in your mind, and you can't unsee that cow. So vision occurred, and neuroplastically, you've changed something in your mind. That is what we do in vision therapy and rehabilitation. We help children or adults make meaningful interpretations of the world. So good vision requires, as you just saw, more than having just 20/20 eyesight. We need to be able to gather and interpret visual information to make a meaningful communication with the world. So I alluded to earlier that vision is very pervasive in the brain. So where does vision occur in the brain? So we look just at the brainstem, our primitive brain, 50% of our cranial nerves directly or indirectly affect vision. Directly, we have cranial nerve 2, which is our optic nerve. 3, 4, and 6 help with our muscle movements, so moving our eyes left, right, up, down, in, out. And indirectly, cranial nerve 5 and 7 help with the corneal sensation, and 7 for the movements of the lids and the blink reflex around our eyes. So 50% of the cranial nerves are affecting vision. If we move on to the cortex, We have in purple here the occipital lobe, which is our primary visual cortex, which you probably think of as visual processing area in the brain. But every other lobe also has very important implications. So the temporal lobe in green here is for visual memory, object recognition, and specifically a memory that's sequential memory. So remembering a sequence in time. When we used to have to remember phone numbers, if you looked at it and you could memorize that sequence, or probably a lot more important today, memorizing spelling words, something in sequence in time, that's your temporal lobe. Also very important with object recognition. What is it? What am I looking at? The parietal lobe up there in pink is very important for visual spatial attention, spatial awareness. Where is something in space, and can I attend to it or attune to it? And the frontal lobe has importance in eye movement, so eye tracking. Where is that ball? Where is that car when I'm trying to cross the street? Or where is the next word on the page? But frontal lobe has higher order functions and lots of other functions in premotor motor cortex as well, involved in emotions and higher order functioning. If you take anything from today's little presentation, is that I want you to understand that vision is learned. If anyone did see that cow back there, hopefully, you know that you can learn a skill at any age, and vision can develop through life. So if we have a baby that was born premature, we can still bolster that learning and cause and improve any visual motor foundations that needs to be improved. So children learn visual skills from interactions with their environment, and these experiences mold their visual perception. I.e., an enriched environment will give them the skills and the foundations that they need more than an unenriched environment. In 1949, which is years ago, a pediatrician ahead of his time, Arnold Gesell, said something very profound about vision that I love to include in this slide. He said, vision is profoundly integrated with the development of the total action system of the child, including posture, coordination, motor skills, even personality and intelligence. And in the next few slides, you'll see why, but you can imagine how personality and intelligence might be implicated in vision. Somebody with their nose in the book for 5-6 hours a day might become nearsighted, and you might perceive someone with glasses who's always reading as a different intelligence level than somebody who's not. However, you might even say if someone has poor vision and is fearful when something jumps out, that you might perceive them as shy. And so there's a lot of perception around vision, and our eyes are telling us a lot about our personality. So how does perception develop? So to perceive, as we saw, all we need to do is be able to discern differences. That's perception. The first perception activity that an infant or a child will do is fixation on an object, and it's usually mom's face. It's usually being able to determine, hairline, eyes, lips, and you can see there's a specific pattern that babies do and look when they're looking at mom or dad for the first time. When they're born, they only have peripheral vision. Their fovea, which is your 20/20 vision spot, is not fully developed at full term. But gaze following occurs at 4 to 6 months later. What's gaze following? So that's being able to track someone else's gaze. So if mom walks in and looks over to the door, does the baby follow mom's gaze and look over to the door? And that is a key development piece that happens typically in normal development between 4 and 6 months old. Another key timing of development is when our motor systems and our visual systems start to link, and this is through our primitive reflexes. We're all born with these survival reflexes for survival. So if I was to touch the cheek of an infant, he or she would move over thinking there's food there. You might have seen the palmar grasp reflex, where if you touch an infant on the palm of their hand, they will grasp with enough strength to hold up their whole body at a certain time. This does not last for very long. There's also a creeping and crawling reflex, and all of these reflexes help us to involuntarily experience the world, so then our voluntary muscle movements can take over. One of the important ones in vision is called the asymmetric tonic neck reflexes. So if I have an infant who is on his back around 3 to 6 months old, and he's flailing his arms and legs, if he hits something, there's a reflex that says, hey, I should look over to what I just hit. And so eyes are linked to motor, and that's our first visual motor task. And that's the asymmetric tonic reflex around 3 to 6 months old in typical development. But so I see children now that still have a retained ATNR, and there's things that we can do to help resolve that and move on so they can make purposeful motor movements. So vision has a motor basis. There's a fantastic study where they did on fetuses' eyes in utero. They're fused until about 7 months gestation. even under fused lids, the baby's eyes are moving in response to the mother's movement. And that's because the vestibular imbalance and cerebellar systems is fully myelinated, fully developed by 24 weeks gestation. And that vestibular and ocular reflex is already starting to be attuned. So mothers who have to be on bed rest, who can't move around, maybe multiple gestations, and they don't have a lot of movement or not able to move around a lot, might see poor development in the vestibular ocular reflex. So once that child is out, we say, let's stimulate those reflexes now and bring them through those motor stages again so that they can link eyes at the rest of their body more seamlessly. Just as I alluded to, random movements, like the baby on his back, accidentally provide the beginnings of voluntary motor control. So once that baby hits whatever it is on the floor and the eye is linked to the motor, then they will voluntarily do that again to experience the world again under their own control. And then they start to get body awareness. They get to understand that, okay, I have a right side, I have a left side, I have an upper body, I have a lower body. And they start to get a mental map of themselves, which later projects to a mental map of the world. North, east, west, south. Can you find the car on the right? Look at the cupboard on the left. They get those children that have difficulty with spatial awareness, the lefts and rights and ups and downs, have difficulty projecting their mental map into the world. But they're imperative for developing bilateral coordination. Crawling is so important. And lateralization, so each side doing opposite action. So all of those lefts and rights and body awareness piece comes early, and it all stems from accidental random movements and then making a foundation upon that. This is a study I was alluding to before about gaze following. Research has said that babies who are better at following their mom, their dad, their guardian's gaze have better vocabularies. And so they were trying to investigate this to say, hey, why and how, and at what age does this develop? So this team of researchers took 12-month-old babies, and they found that those that have active gaze following at 12 months, so mom's looking over here, and then they say, what's she looking at? And follows mom's gaze. They were found to have 335 words known, receptive language, by 18 months. And those babies at the same age, by 12 months, who do not follow active gaze, do not follow mom's gaze, were found to only have 195 words known by 18 months. So as young as a year, and I bet to say we could probably do this research even younger than that, we can already know if they're tracking and following and if they're going to meet some of their language milestones. Why is that so important? Well, language learning assists in learning the names of things. So if mom is looking over and she is opening the cupboard to get a cookie, and mom says cookie, already they're linking. They say, okay, I follow the gaze, my eyes are moving, I see cookie, I'm going to get a cookie. But also can learn about emotions. So mom gazes over and sees a spider on the table and has a surprised or fearful look. They're going to say, oh, that is something that we should be scared of, or that is something that is joyful, or whatever the reaction of the mom had. So they start to learn very early about emotions. So not only labeling things and communicating in language, but also about emotions and how people feel about things, which at such a young age, babies are more attuned than we think. So what if we didn't treat this, if we didn't notice this poor active gaze? Well, it can lead to, a few things: language barriers, cognitive problems, but also social problems. So impaired vision can hinder their ability to participate in processes that are crucial to this development. They didn't learn to identify, to respond to emotions. You might call them the close talkers or the far away talkers. They just don't have those boundaries, so they don't know where they are in space and where other people are in space. And mental concepts like object permanence, if I drop the spoon, it's not gone forever, it will come back if you pick it up. Those things that start such early, 6 to 8 months of development, might be left behind, and you're noticing cognitive problems as a result. What are other important visual skills? So let's say we have great active gaze tracking at 6 months. So what else are we learning around that same time? So between 6 months and 2 years, we're learning many visual skills. We're learning how to line up our eyes to fixate on an object and get information from it. We're learning how to focus, known as accommodation. So can I camera zoom in and make that object clear at near? We're learning how to track. So can I track the ball? Can I kick the ball? We're learning how to team the eyes. That means seeing in 3D. So they work together, and you're able to learn about volume of space sort of across the Z-axis. And all the while, we're developing our perception, our visual memory, our figure ground, our sequencing, all of those visual processing skills that we need for learning. In an older child, if there's deficits in these areas, you might see a few different behaviors depend on the child. Sometimes we get children, a type A child might compensate for a visual skill deficit by they will get this work done. If it kills them, they'll get a headache, they'll close an eye, they'll rub their eyes, but they'll get it done because mom said, get this done. Or you might get the type B type child that says, I don't want to be in pain, I don't want to see double, I don't want to have blurry vision, and might avoid the task and would prefer to look out the window or kick a ball around. Could be the same diagnosis, it's just the behavior of the child showing them how they will or will not do this task. So some things you might see is reading slowly with their finger, covering an eye, holding material close or too far, or some avoidance, the wiggle, jiggles, zones out, falls off his chair, doesn't know boundaries. Might be the same visual skill deficit, just showing them a little bit different. I'll give you an example here of what it would be like to have erratic reading. So those are the children that have trouble tracking across the page and might lose their space. This here, if you know where to start, you can already see it looks terrible to try to read, but this is a simulation of what it is like to have a tracking difficulty. So this is, do you remember, if you can sort of read it along, usually when I'm in a group, I have everyone read it out loud with me, but it all sounds terrible anyway. It says, do you remember the story of the 3 billy goats gruff? There was, and you can go on and I can't get through it, but not only if you're listening to me, does it sound terrible and choppy? At the end of that, what if I was to ask you what you just read? And can you answer 10 questions on it about the text that you just read? The child would be like, oh, I just got through that. It was terrible. I don't remember anything, but aren't you proud of me? I got through it. But the teacher is saying, why can't you answer any questions on this? The tracking was so difficult that all the mental energy left for processing is gone. And this is what it's like for a child to read with an eye tracking disorder. And that's another one. You might see some squinting or using a finger, after 3rd grade to read the page. Loses their place, skips lines, or has difficulty copying from the board. Some signs that your child has difficulty with eye focusing or accommodation would be red eyes at the end of the day, holding their book really far, or squinting, really holding the book really close, or short attention span, headaches. That's all signs of poor focusing. There was a study by Duckman in the late 90s about accommodation, which is eye focusing, in our patients with CP. So CP has a negative impact on focusing abilities. So to focus the eye, it's a circular muscle in the eye, and oftentimes we see patients with CP have difficulty focusing, difficulty with their motor control, also having difficulty controlling the visual system. So compared with neurologically typical age-matched control subjects, children with CP have significantly reduced accommodative responses to near targets. The data demonstrates a significant relationship between reduced accommodation, eye focusing, and reduced communication ability. And the great news here is that one of the easiest things to help in vision therapy or a vision exam is accommodation. We will all lose our accommodation when we are 45, 50 years old. That's when our arms aren't long enough anymore and we can't focus the eyes. So what I would do in a child like this is help them up close with some reading glasses or some bifocals to help that kickstart that accommodative system. A lot of this is very easily managed, just often missed because we're not thinking about accommodation in a young child. We think about accommodation loss in an adult. And aside from those basic visual skills, so all the skills that I just discussed were input skills. So how well does the information get into the eyes? And then we had to say, how does the brain process what we've seen? What's it going to do with the information? When abilities are insufficient, oftentimes I think about it as allotting energy. If they're spending so much energy trying to get the information into the eyes, like we saw with me trying to read that text, there's little mental energy left to decode, to remember, to understand the text. So sometimes it's not a visual perceptual difficulty that arises. It's actually a difficulty with getting information in, and we perceive them as having trouble with lefts and rights and dyslexia or attention, when really it was a skills deficit. So there's definite ways to tease all of those things out. But what are some visual information processing skills? One of the first ones that develops is visual motor integration. That develops with that reflex AT&R we talked about. There's visual spatial skills, which also develops very young, knowing you have a right side, a left side, up, down, back, front. And then there's motor-free visual skills called visual analysis skills. And those are your memory, your photographic memory, your visual discrimination, form constancy, all of those other processing skills. And here's just a list of some signs and symptoms of perceptual difficulties. I love this symptom here, smart in everything but school, which is you could have the most enriching conversation. This child is brilliant. And then is the child who cannot attend at school. It could be a perceptual difficulty. It could be a visual skills difficulty. But if that persists, that beautiful child with self-esteem that went into school, come grade 3, 4, when text size decreases, becomes a child with low self-esteem, temper flare-ups, fatigue, frustration, stress. And it could be just reading that text and being unable to track and focus it, or seeing double reversals and things that are very easily treated. Well, let's talk about vision in preterm babies. To overview, the terms I'll use are premature would be less than 37 weeks gestation, and very premature would be less than 32 weeks gestation. The global estimate of severe visual impairment or blindness due to ROP, retinopathy of prematurity, was 20,000 children in 2010, with over 12,000 children having moderate visual impairment. Of those with visual impairments, 55% had a neurodevelopmental impairment. Now, this makes sense now knowing how pervasive vision is in the brain. Every lobe of the brain has visual connections. And so that link is a logical one. And you saw from one of my first few slides, in a neurotypically developing child, visual impairments is only up to 2 to 5% of the population. Now, those that were born less than 32 weeks gestation have higher risks for an eye turn, which is strabismus, amblyopia, which is poor vision in one eye, high myopia, nearsightedness, and also poor depth perception, which goes along with those top two, and loss of peripheral vision. A peripheral vision, twofold could be a reason for loss of peripheral vision. One could be if they did have ROP, any laser treatments or treatment to that might cut off some of their peripheral vision. Or, as we'll see in a few slides, peripheral vision is the where system of our processing. And so if there's poor development of that where system, which we'll talk about, you might see temporary losses in peripheral vision. Reduced visual information processing is associated with brain injury due to a very low birth weight, which we can assume now seeing those stats on vision in the brain. So this is the slide I was alluding to. So visual processing, there's two cortical pathways for visual processing. There's the ventral stream, and so ventral stream, think, what is it? If I'm looking at a coffee mug, can I label it? Can I see it and label it? What is it? This is called the ventral stream of processing. This stream receives input from the thalamus and brainstem to the visual cortex, the occipital lobe, to the temporal lobe. Remember, our temporal lobe here is for sequencing and visual memory and object identification. That ventral stream is the what is it stream. The dorsal stream develops later, and it receives input from the dorsal areas of the cortex to the parietal lobe for the where is it. So I saw the coffee mug, I said coffee mug, now can I reach and get it? How do I get to it? Where is it? That's the dorsal stream. Oh, here's a better, I should have put this up. So the ventral stream is the one in green to what is it? And the dorsal stream, which develops later, and which is oftentimes where we find deficits in visual motor integration and spatial attention, is that one that goes green to pink at the top, to the parietal lobe. So motion integration, the dorsal stream impairments, are seen in children born premature and are also associated with atypical brain development and neurodevelopmental disorders. Form perception, which is our ventral stream, appears to be relatively spared in preterm babies. So the dorsal stream has been hypothesized to be particularly vulnerable to the effects of prematurity on brain development. So that's the where is it, visual motor integration systems. So impaired motion perception difficulties in lab settings and also in our clinical settings are correlated with reduced reading rate in children, because all that reading is, these children probably can identify words when presented singularly, but when there's a motor movement tracking involved, that's where the reduced reading rate is seen in those children with poor dorsal processing. Impaired motion perception has also been linked to poor social cognition and poor determination of biological movement. So those kids who have difficulty in big environments with playgrounds, kids whipping around them, and being unable to determine biological motion. How fast is that kid coming at me? Can I go really close? Should I go really far? All of those social interactions. Visual memory is also tested in preterm infants. So they took 6-month-old full-term and age-correlated preterm babies at 6 months. And they said those preterm babies failed to differentiate between novel, new, and familiar test stimuli following brief amounts of familiarization. So if something showed them something new, can they identify that again? Full-term babies showed significant novelty preferences by 6 months. However, the exciting part here, they also took some preterm babies and they received extrasensory stimulation. So extrasensory colors and movement and always being stimulated in their senses during the very early weeks of life. And they showed long-term benefits and that their performance was indistinguishable from that of the full terms. So we've all heard about early intervention as best. This is the earliest possible intervention in extrasensory stimulation and perceptual learning, and it showed massive benefits in the visual memory of these infants. So perceptual learning is just that, intensive training that has been shown to improve motion processing. The motion processing is our dorsal stream, which develops later in life, later in gestation. So this is the basis really of neurorehabilitation. So what can be done then? So we've identified these difficulties, or we have a premature baby, potentially had some treatment for ROP, potentially some motor delays. What can we do to bolster this effect? So first things first, I'm an optometrist. I always think, is there anything I can do to correct first the sight? Are they highly myopic, which is nearsighted? Are they farsighted? Do they have astigmatism? That's easy. We can correct that. Let's think now a little bit more therapeutic. How's their accommodative system? Can they focus like a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old should? Or are they focusing like a 50-year-old? That's an easy fix. Let's get them some reading glasses. Or how are they performing in space? Do they have depth along the z-axis? Can they perceive where something is? Because I can use performance lenses and tints to help with that effect. We can help with leaning forward when walking back on the feet, using optics to change space so that they can identify better where they end and where the world begins. And so I'm alluding to what we do here, but vision therapy, or sometimes we call it neurovisual therapy or rehabilitation, is similar to physiotherapy or occupational therapy in that it's a specific program of procedures performed under doctor's supervision that helps develop, improve visual motor skills, visual analysis skills, improves the comfort of it all so the children don't have red eyes or double vision at the end of the day. And it changes how a patient processes to understand the world more naturally. How does that work? So decades of research has provided us with ample knowledge that the brain can change. We saw it earlier when we first identified that cow on the picture. And the beautiful thing is neuroplasticity provides us with a brain that can adapt not only to changes inflicted by damage, but allows adaptation to any and all experiences and changes we may encounter. Research has shown that the brain changes its very structure with each different activity it performs, perfecting its circuits so it is better suited to the task at hand. Just like I could pick up juggling potentially at my age, or learn to swim, or learn a new language. The more practice, repetition, biofeedback, that's how we change our brain. And that's exactly what we do in a rehabilitation program. I won't read all this jargon about VT, but I do like that the basis is in neuroplasticity. I do like what I said here is that vision therapy incorporates the concepts of neural reprogramming and long-term potentiation. That means solidifying your memories via repetition, feedback, reinforcement, and the big one, self-awareness. And that encompasses all of our therapies. There's some great studies. This one done in 2008 called the Convergence Insufficiency Treatment Trial, took children with poor convergence, so poor visual skills, and did active vision therapy on them in office. And it was found to be the most effective treatment over just prism lenses or a placebo therapy at home. In fact, most visual deficiency cases have a very good prognosis, up to 90% when the work is done. Now to wrap up here, because if not everyone can access vision therapy, there's a handful in Toronto area, but even over Canada, there might be only 300 of us. I have some fantastic resources, and this top one here is written by a pediatrician, Active Baby Healthy Brain, which is a fantastic resource of a workbook of activities to put your child through from birth all the way up to 5 years old. I highly recommend this book. It has lots of primitive reflex integration activities, fine motor, gross motor, visual motor activities for our infants, and I highly recommend it. To go more specifically on the vision side, Optometrist Dr. Kenneth Lane wrote this workbook called Developing Ocular Motor and Visual Perceptual Skills. That's another great workbook, more specific to older children, I would say maybe 5+. For that workbook. And Lori Mowbray, a developmental optometrist in the States, wrote Primitive Reflex Training Program at Home. And that's another one just that solely focuses on reflex integration. And all of these things are stuff that you can do at home, on your carpet at home with your children. So I just want to summarize a bit here. If you learn anything, I want you to know that vision is learned and develops through life. Vision is one area to consider if your child is struggling with learning, even if they are 20/20. Vision is not the only cause of learning problems, but if it's not working well, it needs to be addressed. There are many other professionals to consult after ruling out any vision problems, or to work in collaboration with your pediatrician, your psychologist, your occupational therapist, speech language, physio, osteo, behavioral. I could go on and on. Nutrition, naturopaths, but collaborative care for our children is always the best answer. I'm going to stick around if you have any questions. My email is here, Dr. Peddle at elitevisioncenter.com. And then I hope that you got some of those books. I think Fabiana was going to write it in the chat. If you want the names of those books again, I'm happy to share.
Okay, Dr. Peddle, thank you so much. That was very enlightening. We have a few comments and questions here from our live audience.
Great.
Start here with Sarah. As you discussed these milestones with a premature baby, do you expect these milestones at their actual age or corrected age? Great question, Sarah. Thank you.
Yes, and I should have mentioned that their corrected age is what should be expected.
Okay, so one question that I have, because you mentioned the development of the vision is until 24 weeks gestation. And now we know babies as early as 22, 23 weeks are also surviving and really thriving in the community. So this extra sensory stimulation that you mentioned, do we apply for those babies as well?
Those are the ones that I think of the most, in fact. Yeah, so early enrichment in an enriched environment, which for babies developing vision is often black and white stripes, and then we add red, and there's a sequence of color development. But sounds and lights and movement stimulation, the earlier that they can, the better. Those are the infants I think about.
Okay, so if the parent is still in the ICU with the baby, because I remember when I was in the ICU, I had this black and white cutouts inside the crib of my son, and we had the mobile on top. Those are also from our nurses. So how early can we go?
As soon as the eyes are open. So remember, as soon as the eyes are open, the peripheral vision is the first vision system that's developed, not so much, 20/20 acuity. So if you're showing big, bold things without detail, that's what they're going to strive to. And if you have the stripes in the crib, I wouldn't just put them horizontal or just vertical. I would have them in different patterns so they can understand vertical, diagonal, horizontal. And then I would slowly add color, probably a month in.
Okay, so we have another question here from Wendy. Thank you for joining us, Wendy. Great talk, Dr. Peddle. When should we begin cycled lighting for growing preemies in the NICU?
I'm not familiar with cycled lighting. Can you elaborate?
Maybe if Wendy's here, she can answer the questions. But there's a lot of discussions in ICU whether to keep the baby in a darker room or with. But I will wait until Wendy can elaborate on that, so we can go back to her question. So I think my next question is how babies can be assessed, because now parents are home with the baby, maybe the first year out of the ICU. How do we know there's some issues happening? Or there is a delay, and how can they be assessed? That's
a great question. So around 6 months old and typical development is when the eye should be constantly lined up. So if you see an eye that's turned in or turned out or wandering upward after 6 months corrected, that's when I would first seek out care optometrically or through your ophthalmologist. Before that, we're allowed to have eyes that don't work as a team. They're learning that experience. And the more motor that you have, so the more motor influence that you have, having them on their tummy if they can start to pull up and sit around 6 months, the more motor influence, the better for the visual system. Because remember, we crave depth perception to know where we are. So if they're starting to pull up or they're starting to move through space, it's ideal that our eyes can see along this axis and see volume of space. So if they're not doing that, they're telling me, A, there might be some motor development milestones that are missed, but also visual, perhaps one eye is more farsighted than the other, and there's a reason that the eye is turning in. So I would say 6 months is usually when I see my infants, my babies.
Let's be clear here, because not all optometrists or ophthalmologists are trained in neurovision development. So this is a subspecialty of your profession. So how can parents know where to go, who to look for help?
So in Canada here, we started a nonprofit, 2013, called Vision Therapy Canada. That website has a Locate a Doc tab all across Canada of certified optometrists who provide vision rehabilitation services. So yes, that's there, Vision Therapy Canada. If you're not in Canada, there's COVD.org, there we go, COVD.org, and that has an international database of certified optometrists in vision rehabilitation.
That is great. So let's go back to Wendy's question. She did clarify here. Let me find her comment. Here you go. We have lights on in the daytime, and then in the evening we turn the lights down. This is in the NICU, just for those who are not here for the first question.
Yeah, so I mean, to kickstart circadian rhythm, I think that's ideal. Remember, there's melanopsin in the back of our eyes that we want to start to be able to get them on a sort of a rhythm of arousal and sleep. So I think that's fine. Whatever the nurses would do, I would trust them on that more than I. But in terms of lighting, we have to keep into consideration age. Are the lids still fused? Is there central fixation? She wrote here, we started cycle lighting at 34 weeks with low ambient light, no direct ventilated people are exactly. Yep. And you'll see that people are like, that would be easily guided, I believe, through your team in the NICU. And post all of that, that's when a neurodevelopmental optometrist would take over to see if we can use light to really bolster that autonomic nervous system.
Okay, we have another comment from Susie. Waited until 38 weeks for mobiles as overstimulating vision prior to 38 weeks affects auditory development.
So auditory, so like the vestibular system, that's the one that's fully myelinated at full term gestation. So I think you just wrote 38 weeks there. So that's the one that's going to be the most important at the time. But I would still use, prior to 38 weeks, I would still use at least large stripes. Nothing like a moving mobile with sounds and blinking lights that it's going to be overstimulating, but at least get the patterns of stripes horizontal and vertical.
Okay, and Wendy,
yes.
Some literature suggests doing this starting around 34, 35 weeks corrected.
I agree with that.
Okay, so we have a question from Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us here today. We have a 24-week with ROP with a vast injection and small PVL. 3.5 months adjusted and not overly tracking much. Looking into concerns with head control, but just wondering what we should expect. We've been told it's not currently a vision issue, and she added here by an ophthalmologist.
Mm-hmm. It does sound like vision is impacted. Absolutely. If we have with ROP, I'm not sure, you did Avastin injections. So that means the peripheral retina might be affected and cut off some of that peripheral vision so we could save the rest of the eye, which was fantastic that we have these technologies. But if they're not gaze tracking, which at that age is central vision, because we've developed our foveal vision at that time, then that might affect social behavior, language learning, and communication. So while sight in terms of the ophthalmologist exam is probably good, the vision piece is what I think about in this child. So the more stimulation we can do now, whether it's with prisms or magnification or exercises, like an early intervention, the better the child will do.
Okay, so let's talk about vision therapy, because it is a private therapy and is not covered by all insurance. For families who cannot afford vision therapy, what can they do at home? Is there any other resource available for the families in the community?
Yeah, so the 2 second books that I posted up there have vision therapy home activities, which are wonderful. Our nonprofit, Vision Therapy Canada, also has a FRETS, we call it the Betty FRETS Fund, which will fund a vision therapy for X amount of patients per year. So you would go to your developmental optometrist, they would submit your application for financial coverage, and I think they do it's not a lot, a handful of optometrists are covered by the Betty FRETS Fund per year. So I would definitely reach out to them for that. And otherwise, even just getting the evaluation done by your optometrist, there's often things that we can do in terms of tints and light therapy and home exercises that don't need to come in office that can provide an enriched environment for them.
Absolutely. And there is one more question here. Is VT available in Manitoba?
It is. I would visit visiontherapycanada.com and put in Manitoba on the find a doc, and you should be able to find, I already have a few that are up there that are fantastic. So yes.
Okay, I'm just sharing the website once again. Dr. Peddle, any final messages for our families and clinicians watching us live here today?
Oh, that's a great question. I just want people to know that we are neuroplastic until our last breath. So we just have, every child can learn. We just have to figure out how to teach them. That's what we're here for. Okay,
actually, I was going to finish, but there's a comment or a question here. I haven't been able to read the whole comment, but somebody who was born a preemie. I just have a comment in general. As I was told my vision issues cannot be helped as I'm now an adult. I was born 24 weeks. I have a lazy eye since early childhood, but had no treatment. I also have had oil drop cataracts since birth that have never progressed or have a known cause. As an adult, I have amblyopia and strabismus and struggle with depth perception. And one eye seeing certain things more blurry than other. Any comment? Thank you, Ashley, for joining us.
So this is wonderful to see the other side of it, to see the adult perspective of what happened when we didn't necessarily know to train the visual system and the side effects of that. Now she's a beautiful functioning adult now, but lacking that awareness in visual space. What I love to lecture about, which I'm not lecturing about today, is amblyopia or poor vision in one eye due to having an eye turn, a strabismus, or a high refractive error in that one eye. And we now know from decades of research, but especially from 2015 to 2021 even, there's great research on neuroplasticity and amblyopia. And in fact, the old treatment protocols of patching an eye is no longer deemed the primary gold standard of treatment. Vision therapy and a neuro lens is actually the newest treatment. So I would not give up hope. In fact, my last two patients in here were adults with amblyopia that we're putting through a therapy program. So there's absolutely lots that we can do for you.
Oh, Dr. Peddle, thank you so much for joining us here today. Always a pleasure learning and talking with you. I'm sure there'll be more opportunities for you to come and share your knowledge with our audience. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching us here today live from our YouTube channel or Facebook. We are very grateful to have your companionship every Friday here, 1 p.m. And all the past sessions are available on our website. I'm going to share our link here, canadianpremis.org. We have over 100 sessions, a beautiful library of content for parents and clinicians. And I really want to thank our sponsors, AbbVie and Water Wipes, for their ongoing support for our education sessions. And we are a charitable organization, and I believe that through education and support, we can empower families, ensuring they're ready to care for their babies. Please visit our website, canadianpremis.org, and consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all families. And I see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you and stay well.